So I had a request to review my favorite scary movie of all time. Spoiler alert, it's Scream. Let's talk about it. Scream is a 1996 horror classic from legendary scary movie director Wes Craven. Now, this movie kicked off a whole franchise of Scream movies, as well as a whole bunch of knockoffs and rip-offs that came out constantly all throughout the late 90s. One of them, called The Faculty, was actually shot right around where I live, and one of my very good friends is actually in it. There's a close-up of his face and everything. So this movie came out in 1996, the year I started high school, and by the time I graduated, we had two more Scream movies. They're all big hits. They were loved, and this really is the horror franchise of my teenage years. That whole kind of snarky, self-referential horror comedy thing. This is the franchise of my teenage years, and this is my favorite horror movie of all time. So before I go into my full review, I want to give a big shout out to Cody Leach. He's a fellow YouTuber and he's one of my supporters on Patreon. I asked my Patreon supporters if there was anything they would like for me to review, and he suggested I review my favorite scary movie, so I'm very happy and excited to talk about Scream. So after this video's done, go ahead and head over to Cody Leach's channel. He talks about movies, TV, sometimes video games, sometimes music, and he's a good buddy of mine, so please head on over to his channel, like, subscribe, comment. He's a great guy, great personality with good insight into stuff. And if you like my content, please consider supporting me on Patreon, and you can have some influence into some of the videos that I create for this channel. With that said, let's talk about Scream. So in Scream, a killer shows up in the town of Woodsboro and starts killing people. The lead character is Sidney Prescott. Her mother was killed the year before, and her friends are trying to survive all of this while trying to figure out who the killer is. On paper, it just sounds like another slasher movie, but the catch in all of this is that the characters are aware of slasher movies. They are aware of the cliches, the tropes that go along with slasher movies, and therefore they are essentially aware that they are living in a slasher movie while in the movie. Now, it doesn't break the fourth wall. They're not looking and talking to the camera, but they're talking about horror movies, the ones that you've seen, the ones that I've seen. They're talking about what people are doing. They're sitting down and having conversations. Well, he would have a movie. He would do this. He would do this. Well, he's like this, and going back and forth, and throughout the whole movie you're wondering, who is it, who did it, could it be this person? And they are aware that you're thinking that, and they're talking about what you're thinking while you're watching the movie, which makes it both horrifying because you don't know who the killer is, and the movie from the very beginning kills off someone that you don't think they're going to kill off, and therefore it sets up a world where anyone can die, any of your favorite characters can die, and they're aware of this themselves, which makes for just a very enjoyable, fun movie that's funny, that both pokes fun at horror movies, that celebrates horror movies. It's horrifying, it's funny, it's all of those different things mixed into a single movie, which makes for a very enjoyable cinematic experience. Now, if you're watching this for the first time in the year 2017, some of the freshness of it is a little bit gone because the movie's been ripped off so many times, and this sort of self-referential meta humor has been done to death since then, and it's kind of been perfected in movies like Deadpool, that you miss just how fresh and groundbreaking this really was when it first came out in 1996. But this really was a special movie at the time it came out. With all that said, let's start talking about the good, and there's a lot of good here. First off, the acting is really across the board excellent. I mean, horror movies kind of have a reputation for, generally speaking, especially slasher movies, have a reputation for not having the best acting. And you just look at the cast of this movie, and there's a bunch of actors and actresses in it that 20 years later are very strong, have great careers, still going strong. And some of the other lesser actors that haven't gone on to have as much success, this is like their definitive role. This is the thing that they're remembered for, where they were excellent and that brought the best out of them. So Courtney Cox, of course, we remember her from Friends and all the work she's done since Friends, and this being a great addition to her cast. So she's kind of an established great actress that you'd expect her to be great in it. But then you have people like David Arquette, who isn't known as a great actor, but they found the right role for him in this movie where he kind of plays this weird, quirky cop that fits perfectly into his acting range. And so he's so likable, even though you might have hated him, he might have been annoying, but they found just the right spot for him as an actor, as well as like actors like Matthew Lillard, who this was kind of at the peak of his popularity and kind of the thing that sparked him becoming kind of a 90s teen icon with his specific sense of humor. This is the movie that kind of sprung him into the world, that made him famous. You can just, go across the board and you have Drew Barrymore being in a small but a crucial role in the film, that even the small roles in this film are played by great actresses. Or the principal is played by Henry Winkler, who brings just such a bravado to this role that otherwise he'd just be kind of generic principal. But because it's played by such a good actor, you remember him. And that's really the whole movie. All the actors in this really, besides maybe Courtney Cox and Drew Barrymore, this is their definitive role for me, and they all did such a good job. Beyond just the acting, also the movie's blend of humor and horror fits just perfectly into that right spot, where it's horrifying, people die violent, gory deaths, but the movie finds the right spot in understanding the immaturity of teenagers. In that while people are dying around them, they act immature. They don't celebrate it, but they don't know how to respond to it, and so they do immature things and they make light of it, which teenagers actually do. But it doesn't just get teenagers, it gets the horror genre and the funny things about it. Partially that's because it's, obviously from Wes Craven, who can both, he's the right person to make a movie like this, because he's not making fun of horror movies. He loves horror movies. He's not making fun of slasher movies. He's made slasher movies. And so bringing in kind of this criticism of the genre with someone that is absolutely the legend of the genre is the perfect mesh of the humor and the criticism with the love of the genre to make a movie that blends all of that perfectly. Also, when you move into the third act of this movie, since the movie's kind of a whodunit, who's the killer, who the whole movie we're talking about who it is, speculating who it is, and then as people are killed off, you're like, all right, which one of these people is it? And you get to the third act, and has the big reveals, and it's actually surprising. You don't know who it's going to be, and the way it's handled, the different elements to it, the way that there's red herrings, the way they throw you off course, works so nicely because the script is so smart and works so nicely to know who you're thinking it is, and it plays into all of that. And then as the twists and the reveals, that plays into everything that you're wanting to do with that makes for an actually satisfying reveal in the third act of the movie. And then as you're talking about the good, you have to talk about the opening scene of this movie that it's a perfect sequence. It's the perfect opening to this movie. I mean, it's really quite astounding how iconic this scene is and how it instantly made Ghostface, shot him up to the A-list of slasher killers, up there with Mike Myers and Jason, instantly with this one scene that even in the casting of it, that they got Drew Barrymore for the sequence, just is perfect, and it's fun and it's quirky and it's interesting. The dialogue works so well while being horrifying and terrifying all at once. I mean, it might be I guess I'd probably say it's my favorite sequence in any horror movie of all time. That's how good the opening to this movie is. It sets the tone for a movie that lives up to that opening sequence. So this is a really special, horrifying, funny, amusing, insightful horror film with a great cast. And just to talk about the bads, I don't actually have any actual criticisms of this film. Few observations for you that might be watching it for the first time. It's a movie that's so soaked in pop culture that it very much dates itself to 1996. It feels dated. It feels like you're jumping back 20 years into the past because it is very much a movie for 1996, whether that's the music, the pop culture references. It dates itself pretty heavily, which isn't really a criticism, but it is a statement that if you watch it now, you're hitting rewind on life back to 1996. The other kind of, not criticism, but thing to observe is because it has been ripped off so many times, because the tropes have been repeated and they've done a TV show out of it and so many other things, some of the freshness of it feels like it's lost because you have seen other people do this type of thing since then. And some people have done a great job doing similar types of things where you kind of like with Deadpool doing it with the comic book genre, some of the freshness is lost, some of the edge is lost, but that's not really a criticism. That's just an observation of the reality of things. I don't have any actual criticisms of this film in and of itself. And the only reason I wouldn't give it a perfect score is because it's not a movie it has the ambition to be the greatest movie of all time, that I would give it a 10 out of 10 or something like that. But because I would say it's my favorite and one of the best of an absolute of a genre, I would give this movie a 9.5 out of 10. If you like horror movies, especially if you like slasher movies, I can't imagine that you wouldn't like this movie. It's very fun, it's very enjoyable, and even if you don't like horror movies, like I'm not a big horror movie, slasher movie guy, and I love this movie. It's very enjoyable. My wife's always like, you watch that movie all the time. And she doesn't actually talk like that, which is true. I do watch this movie a lot. I try and show it to people all the time. I actually showed it to someone just, I don't know, a couple months ago. They'd never seen it before, so I was excited to get to show it to them. This is a really cool movie that, if I'm being honest, if you haven't seen it, you need to go watch it. Go check it out as soon as possible. It might make, if you don't like horror movies, it might make you like this one particular horror movie. And if you like horror movies and you haven't seen this, what are you doing? How have you not seen Scream if you like horror movies? That's kind of weird, if you ask me. But that's just my opinion. How about you? What did you think about Scream? Tell me down in the comments section down below. I'd love to have you talk about it, because I don't want to just talk about Scream. I want to talk about Scream with you, because it's one of my favorite movies of all time. It gives me so much nostalgia for the 90s, both because it came out in the 90s and it's set in the 90s, and it reminds me so much of the 90s. Actually, this franchise, I even have the soundtrack to the third movie in the series. That's how much, actually I think I have the soundtrack to all the movies in this series. That's how much I love this franchise. Let's talk about it down in the comments section. With all that said, if you're new to my channel, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do movie reviews, sometimes retro reviews like this one. I also do ranking videos. I have a movie trivia show I do on here as well. And another thing to consider, like I said, this video was kind of sponsored content from my Patreon account, where one of my patrons did suggest that I review this film, and that's where it came from. So I would please ask you to consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can expand my content and so you can help me know what you guys actually want. With all that said, thank you for watching.